Thanks everyone for coming to this 15th meeting of Barnes International Guard Restoration Advisory Board. It looks like we have a pretty good attendance online, about 10 people, and we'll start moving forward.
Can I ask a question before we start? Is this the right packet? Because ours says 14.
It is, and I apologize. That's one of my first corrections that I'm having to be back. As we get to the rest, we've added a photo that you'll see, and taking one name off our partners list.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you for catching that. The agenda this evening is in your packet. It has not changed, and we will cover meeting logistics, welcome and introductions, RAB business. We'll have a technical review of the pill contaminants and previous remedial treatments impact on PFAS. We'll cover environmental restoration program status update, entertain public questions and comments, closing remarks, and of course, then we will adjourn. In terms of meeting logistics, everyone should be aware that this meeting is being recorded. As per the norm, RAB members will be invited to ask questions at the end of each topic. We do ask that you raise your hand to be called on to speak, and that is the same for those who are online. As you are called on, if you introduce yourself so that everyone in the room and online knows who is speaking, that would be very much appreciated. And because we do have a lot of content to cover this evening, if you could observe a 2-minute time limit to allow other RAB members to participate, that would be welcome. In terms of public participants, we ask that those, I don't see any public in the room tonight, but that they hold questions to the end of the meeting. In the room, raise your hand, introduce yourself. Online, please submit questions through the chat feature, and those questions will be read and addressed at the end of the meeting. This is not a new slide, but if there are people who are online that have not attended previously, please let me know. Let me know if you have any technical issues. I heard some people joining the room. I'm going to make sure that we get them in the right? What's my people?
Thank you.
If you're online, if we ask that you have your camera turned off to save bandwidth, you can do that by seeing the icons at the bottom of your screen, or they may be at the top actually. You've got your chat, the people shows you who's in the room. There's the hand raise, and click the microphone to unmute yourself when you are called on. Telephone participants, you do have a couple of unique features in terms of needing to dial *5 to raise your hand to be called on to speak after the presentation. And once you do raise your hand, and you're acknowledged, you'll want to dial *6 to unmute your phone. Are there any RAB members using a phone this evening? I definitely apologize. I am not seeing the people in the lobby. And I'm not seeing anybody commenting in chat that they've added, so we're going to call that.
I just asked, is Senator Velas's office on, or Kelly Pace's?
No.
No.
Not if they identify in that way, no.
Okay.
But if you'd like to say that louder, do you want to ask them to identify themselves?
I'm Kelly Hellman, and is Kelly Pease on it, or Senator Velas?
No.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sandra.
And Kathy, I will turn it over to you for your welcome introductions.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Hellman, and I am co-chair, community co-chair, and I'm glad to see all of you here. It's awesome. Thank you for coming.
Colonel Glass,
Hi.
would you like to say a few words?
Hello, everyone. Colonel Glass. This is my third RAB meeting. I was able to attend one before I took over as wing commander, then obviously did our virtual one last time. So it's a pleasure to see all of you again in person. Just a quick background on me. I took over the 104th Fire Wing in December. My family and I have been stationed in Western Massachusetts off and on since 2014. So we love living in this part of the world. And I'm very excited to work more with all of you. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me and my team if there's anything that we can do to help keep this relationship going. It's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to just quickly go over who's in the room and who participates in RAB. We have our Air National Guard team here, community RAB members, quite a few in the room, a couple online, it looks like. And then we have Tamara Cardona. Merrick is on the line. And I think Thomas Keefe from Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection is also here in the room. In addition, we have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers team, at the SRS Battelle JV team, and other contractors like myself and Catherine. Moving on to RAB business. Very quick updates today regarding the January meeting minutes. You were provided the minutes. I guess we will ask for approval. We'll talk about upcoming meetings, and then hopefully you all had a chance to look at the new RAB rule handbook that was shared, and we'll just go briefly over what the intention of that was. Does anybody in the RAB, is there consensus that the meeting minutes can be approved from the January meeting, or were there issues or changes that needed to be made?
I didn't know. Girls, that
Thank you. In terms of upcoming meetings, this did not change from the last meeting. Just a review, the next meeting will be July 23rd, followed by October 22nd, and then January 28th. RAB rulebook, it builds on the 2007 handbook with the same rules, just a little bit of updated guidance. In terms of changes, there's a stronger focus on community engagement and transparency, talks about best practices and real world knowledge given the amount of RABs that are happening at bases all over the country. Expands guidance on communication meetings and participation, and it includes tools to support effective and collaborative RABs. Were there comments or questions on any of the RAB member business?
no, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not seeing anything online, but we'll move on. And now we will have a presentation by Dr.
I'll come over.
Yeah,
This is
I got copies.
Sarah Sinclair, the base civil engineer and the COR for the contract for the TAP grant. We have here with us today is Dr. Danielle Hare. She's from the University of Mass Amherst. Dr. Bao had recommended her, and she's in the I have to make sure I get this right, hydrogeology, watershed hydrology, and the ecosystem ecology, and modeling and focusing and all that, and as well as the field methods to improve the process. So she would, at our last meeting, she was online, talked about what she was going to present. So we all came to agreement, and she's here today to provide some background and information on co-contaminants. So please welcome Danielle Hare. Dr. I'm sorry,
Oh my goodness, no worries. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to move through those slides in kind of my planned way, but please stop me or interrupt me, especially those in the room. If need extra clarification, I'd rather have that on. Well, we can talk about it in the slides and we can walk through things together. So I'm really happy to be here as part of the what is it, the Technical Advisory Public Participation, is that I get the acronym right? And I think it's just such a key piece to be able to move between peer-reviewed literature and kind of this most recent science and public. I think we don't do that enough. And so I'm really going to try to do my best here today to make sure I'm facilitating that. A little bit of the agenda on what I'm presenting on today. So we're all on the same page. I'm going to give you a little bit of background introduction about myself, kind of where how I view these questions and how I've thought about things in the past. We're going to focus on AFFF co-contamination. Co-contamination in this piece means that there is another source of contamination other than PFAS. In the third section, we'll talk about remediation implications. So that is focused on largely prior remediations, but also potential remediation options, and seeing what that could be, how that could influence PFAS mobility, as well as fate and transport. I'll explain that in a little bit. I have a few recommendations, and then we'll have time for questions, more involved questions at the end. And answers. Yes. Okay, so today it's really important that we focus on the scope of what I'm presenting on, and that is really the focus of looking at the co-contaminants. So what contaminants could be on site alongside PFAS and what that means for fate and transport. So what I mean when I say fate and transport, fate is actually how the contaminant, so how PFAS will transform or change in response to contamination, and transport would mean, is there a mechanism for changing the transportation or the transport of PFAS, the mobility piece of the question, with a commingled contaminant, as well as thinking about the remediation, which I kind of talked about before. So who am I? I'm a research assistant professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I've been there for a year. Before that, I was a postdoc at Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies. I've largely focused on carbon cycling through groundwater and surface water. My focus is really groundwater surface water interactions. And so what that means is, how does groundwater move and emanate or move into surface water bodies, and what that means for both just physical transport of water, but also the biogeochemical reactions that occur alongside that. So I got my PhD at UConn in ecosystem ecology and water resources. I did work for 4 years as a remediation consultant. I focused on site investigation and conceptual site model development, again, largely focused on this groundwater surface water interactions piece. So I do have experience in consulting, in remediation consulting. All right, so we'll start with our first piece, the PFAS and co-contaminants. And so it kind of boils down to this question: how could the presence of another chemical modify PFAS fate and transport? And again, I talked about the fate piece being that transformation piece, that change piece, and the transport being the movement piece. Okay, so the way I think about it is when I think about a site, any site that is, but in particular at the Barnes site, we have 3 kind of places that all have their own signatures or considerations we need to think about. The first one is the source zone. That is the location where the contamination is at highest concentration. This can be the primary source zone. And so what would that mean was where the use, the discharge, the spill occurred, and this can be any contaminant. And then a secondary source zone would be a place where it has moved since, but is now providing kind of that highest concentration. And so often we can see this in more legacy effects. It's not necessarily where it was spilled, but there's another source. And I'll talk about that more in detail. The second important piece is the plume, the actual extent of where the contamination is. Often we can think about this as in a groundwater plume, and I know I'm speaking to an experienced audience here, so we know kind of a plume being the extent of the contamination. So there's different considerations. So they're similar, but there's also different considerations for thinking about fate and transport of PFAS in the plume, as well as then the discharge locations. And in this case, particularly with PFAS, we are thinking about the ultimate how it leaves the groundwater system. And so that can leave and enter surface water, it can leave and enter wells, it can leave and enter soil. And so we can think about that, but it's important to kind of break it into these three categories because they have different considerations. All right, so we're going to start with the first part, and that's source zone. Okay, so there's, again, the three places that we're thinking about fate and transport. And I'm going to try and walk through this so that we can all be on the same page. So as a contaminant, any contaminant, but in this case, we can think about HFF being the main contaminant that we are interested in, is released on the surface. It infiltrates, then percolates through this unsaturated zone. So the unsaturated zone is the zone where there is both air and water. And when you then enter the saturated zone, all the pore space, all those spaces, all the voids in between all the sediment grains is full of water. That's what delineates the difference between the unsaturated zone and the saturated zone. Sometimes we can refer to the unsaturated zone as the Veda zone, but really what the Veda, so this might be semantics, but ultimately the Veda zone does actually not include this capillary fringe. I point out this in particular because this capillary fringe is often just like centimeters large. And what this is an area where the pore space is filled with both water and air. And this space is kind of, you can imagine like the, when you put a paper towel into some water and the water wicks up. That's what this capillary fringe is essentially. And so the thickness of the capillary fringe will depend on, the sediments, how well packed they are, the size and the distribution of those grains. This is really important for PFAS because of the air-water interface affinity it has. And the capillary fringe is going to be an area where PFAS likes to accumulate. And I'm going to kind of walk through a few more pieces here. So ultimately, if the contaminants, in this case again, a PFAS, were to move with the water, it would move, it would have so sorption here is adsorption, or essentially like sticking factor. How well does it stick? And so we can say, okay, how fast would it move with the water, and how far did it actually move? Okay, so how well something sticks lends itself to this absorption stickiness factor. All right, so there's a lot going on here. And these are what has been outlined by the ITRC, the Interstate Technical, I don't have the RC, something council, Regulation Remediation Council, as some of the key factors in what will influence how well PFAS or how well or how much PFAS moves within this Veda zone and unsaturated zone. But what we see here and in my literature review as constantly coming out as one of the most important factors is the presence of this air-water interface. This makes a lot of sense because PFAS is inherently a surfactant, and that is why it was used in the first place. And that is a property that makes it really like these places where it has air-water interface. And that is because of the head-tail nature of all PFASs, where the head is the hydrophilic, loves water, and the tail is hydrophobic and doesn't like water. And so it does really well in these areas where you have both air and water. And so you can see greater accumulation. We see that in surface water bodies when we see foam accumulation. Those kind of nano to micrometer foams can have much higher concentrations than the surrounding waters because of this affinity for the air-water interface. And so ultimately what we see here is that with PFAS, this soil type has an incredible importance on how well or how much PFAS moves through the environment. And that a lot of that has to do with this air-water interface nature. So, but you're saying, okay, but wait, we're talking about co-contamination. How does what I just talked about relate to co-contamination? Well, so contamination such as jet fuel, which is the most consistent co-contamination, it also has an affinity for air-water interface. And so, and ultimately, if those hydrocarbons are already in those air-water interfaces, you won't see as strong absorption of PFAS. Generally, longer chain PFAS have a higher affinity. So that means they'll be more likely to stick around in these air-water interfaces versus short chain ones they move faster, they have higher mobility. And so you see that, but then if you add the presence of a hydrocarbon, then you actually see both of those move a lot faster, again, through this air-water interface area, which they would have tended to stick around. How this can influence ultimate movement and mobility can be really important in thinking about the legacy effect of contamination and how long source zones are going to play a role in continuing to contaminate the groundwater. Okay, want to make sure I hit most of those points. Okay, and a little bit more on the air-water interface, because in all of the work that I did, this just seems to be the most consistent point to really hit home, or at least the strongest evidence of fate and transport, really considering this air-water interface, where it is, and thinking about how that could be thought about as these capillary fringe, and how that could influence source zone dynamics. All right, so again, we have the unsaturated zone on the top, that area of mostly air, but air and water, so water is moving through that. We have more vertical transport in that area. And then in the saturated zone, we have a predominantly horizontal flow. So at this site, we have really strong vertical gradients, which is interesting in itself, but still mostly horizontal. And so, but what we are interested in here is this level. But as we know, these are not stable through time. We have shown that PFAS migration through the beta zone, it can be really rapid, yet we still see these high levels of groundwater contamination. So if it moves fast through the beta zone, we would expect the source zone to be depleted relatively quickly and not have these long-term sources, but we still do. And so the question is why? And one of the hypotheses could be that there's a bunch more accumulation in these air-water interfaces. And so while we see migration in through the sandy soils into the capillary fringe, we actually might have more air-water interface absorption, and it's sticking around and accumulating in these relatively thin zones above the water table. Okay. What this is showing, okay, so I'll walk through this nice and slow. So if we start with this blue box down below, we have 3 different PFAS compounds. We are moving from shorter to longer chain. And if there was no air-water interface, so this is a modeling example, we can see the y-axis here is concentration in the groundwater, and the x-axis here is time in years. If we have no air-water interface, we have a relatively rapid pulse of contamination move through the system. And so that's by this very high peak, very low tailing. But if we do, so the top here, this yellow box is with air-water interface. We can see that it is a very different story. If we look at the red line, we can see how the time is lengthened, the peak is much later, and while the concentration might be lower, it is more prolonged through time, which when we're dealing with something that is worrisome even at lower concentrations, this can be pretty problematic versus kind of the pulse that goes through the system. And so that's what we are seeing here. And we're seeing the shorter chain versus the longer chain pulses of these systems kind of stretch out and proceed for a very long time. Okay, and so what this is illustrating is we have an air-water interface. So the importance of it can't be overlooked when thinking about how long contaminants can persist in the source zone. Okay, we can also see this in the plume dynamics in itself. If we have contaminated groundwater and that groundwater is moving, we can actually deposit some in the unsaturated zone through groundwater movement, right? So seasonally, event-driven, the groundwater moves, the table goes up and down. And so that's changing where the capillary fringe is. That air-water interface is changing. It's changing through time. Okay, so what this is here, so anomaly is representing the difference from mean. This is just groundwater levels. I took that from the Westfield USGS well. And so what this is looking at is monthly changes in water table elevation. This black line being the mean, the monthly means. And so what this is trying to show is that we do have these fluctuations on average. They can vary as much as 10 centimeters about, which doesn't seem like a lot. But it could be important when we're thinking about a very small zone changing and potentially creating a smear zone, not just at the source zone, but at these down gradient plume areas. Then when we pull out the real-time data of that same well, we can see how dynamic the groundwater levels really are, not just on a monthly scale, but on an event scale. And so we can actually see, this is in feet now, I apologize for the unit change, but we can ultimately see these large, quick fluctuations. And it has been shown that these kind of event-driven flushes, changes in water tables, can be really important for mobilizing PFAS and creating kind of temporally elevated PFAS migration. Okay, so that lends itself to these conclusions, well, to top conclusions here. But so seasonally, we really have to think about how PFAS is moving. So this timing of percolation, when water is actually moving through that unsaturated zone, but also these fluctuations in water table can be very important for understanding PFAS mobility and actual groundwater concentrations. If we just take groundwater concentrations a few times a year, does that really capture the groundwater variability? Also, didn't have time to go into, but I wanted to make sure they were put here. Winter conditions have shown to increase PFAS due to lower biodegradation, as well as ionic strength. So essentially like how salty the water is, and pH can modify the PFAS retention as well. And so this is really important for thinking about how changes in hydraulic conductivity, notably in this kind of terrestrial environment. It would be like road salts and such like that. Those are issues for other reasons, but we would also increase the ionic strength in the groundwater. And so overall, thinking about what kind of it's not economical to sample PFAS everywhere all the time. So how can we use these other geochemical indicators to tell us something about PFAS transport? Is a consideration we're thinking about more. Okay, ultimately then discharge locations are also of concern. I know a little less on this site, but ultimately there's been studies shown that as groundwater emanates into the surface water bodies, we actually see increase in precursor transformation, so shorter chain, longer chain, changing to shorter chain. And this is largely due to this transition from a low oxygen groundwater environment to a high oxygen environment with a lot of carbon, which can facilitate these oxidation reactions. And that is important for thinking about remediation, because how could the plans or prior remediation influence PFAS, fate, and transport? So I focused on these 5 past cleanup actions. All right, we source zone removal is always going to be ineffective. It has its own cons associated with it, but then these other so natural attenuation, bioventing, and oxygen releasing compounds all have something in common, and that's they are increasing the oxidation potential of the groundwater. And so while there wasn't any specific research that has been done, it seems from, again, I could have been missing something, but my pretty exhaustive search didn't look at the remediation in particular because it's not really effective for PFAS. What instead we know from, actually here I'll go, from this kind of we know that this transition from a low oxygen to a high oxygen environment can increase the degradation and increase this kind of mobility, moving from the longer chain to the shorter chain. PFAS compounds. So these all increase the oxidation. Therefore, these all hypothetically would increase the mobility of PFAS. Okay, increasing the oxidation through either passive methods. So bioventing is much more passive. I didn't write air sparging here. I can't remember if that was done here. But then, or more active, like actually doing ISCO, or oxygen releasing compounds, essentially making the groundwater more oxic. Works for certain hydrocarbons and VOCs really well. In this case, it would increase the mobility of PFAS. Okay, and that was so. Dr. Tagbanov, she was able to look at this through flow through the Ashima Pond, which is from this is research done in combination with the Otis Air Force Base. Which has very similar aquifer properties. So I think there's a lot of nice research that came out of that might be good to draw from. Also, there's been a lot of work recently on considering background PFAS, ongoing work. We have to note, though, the difference between ubiquitous and widespread, particularly when thinking about a site. We have very much, with AFFF, we're able to identify type PFAS. And so being able to actually really consider what precursors and degradation products are associated with PFAS on this site can be strongly typed. Just wanted to consider this, though I don't think it's relevant.
Anything with our base?
Well, so they're bases. Well, so in considering background PFAS, so what these studies and a few other ones that I'm familiar with that are undergoing review right now are looking at New England, and they are looking at sampling, well, they have sampled sites that should not have experienced any PFAS, and then they're sampling that to get at a background concentration that would be acceptable.
Information. We haven't even done the soil sampling.
Okay, right. And so I guess what I'm just saying is drawing attention to a few of the studies that are our focus. Yes, I know. And so I just want to make sure that I'm covering all the bases because this is something that is being discussed at length in PFAS literature at this stage. All right, so my recommendations that are really important are to focus on delineating the source zone characteristics and focusing on these sorption dynamics. So this sorption dynamics refers to both the air-water interface as well as the presence of clay layers or higher carbon lenses, because those will inherently absorb and retain PFAS a lot longer while still releasing it. So these legacy effects will be consistent and long-lived from those areas. I think examining and really being critical of sampling times and spaces, both with space and temporally thinking about the importance of event sampling, thinking about the importance of where we're sampling and why we're sampling it and how much we're integrating across, knowing that we can have accumulation in a relatively short period of time. If we're taking homogeneous samples, is that actually representative of the system and what the groundwater would be incurring? Trying to utilize low-cost continuous monitoring systems, such as installing pressure transducers with conductivity, redox potential. I'm happy to talk about any of these in more detail. Dissolved oxygen, obviously we said that that's a really important piece of knowing how well or when PFAS will be more mobile. We want to sample those times that actually represent the higher pulses. Thinking about increasing surface water samples to consider these seasonally specific events. I understand how this can be pretty difficult, but I think it is pretty pertinent when we have this understanding of how important the this air-water interface can be. And then also to review the approaches, the methods, and the findings from similar hydrogeologic bases such as the Otis Air Force Base. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions, clarifications, thoughts.
Our area is much different than Cape Cod, so I don't know how you can compare the two.
So the way I'm thinking about it is through the sandy aquifer lens. And so the way that water moves through sand can be thought of can be consistent, right? So the way we model and interpret results won't be the same, but at least we can start thinking about, okay, they saw this, how does that fit within our site? Not, it's gonna be the exact same, so let's just do exactly what that's not the right approach. But we can learn something. And I think it's important to not disregard other sites in that way, especially so that the USGS has done incredible work there. The PFAS work has been going on for a very long time. A lot of the kind of, I would say cutting edge research has come off of that base in particular. So I do think it's a worthwhile, at least to understand what worked and what maybe didn't work there. Not saying it will work here, but saying that there's some similarities.
RAB member Chris Clark online has a question. Chris?
Hi, Dr. Hare. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really enlightening. I took some great notes. I have a couple questions, but I'll save them and just take one and then come back later if there's time. The first one that's really sticking out to me is could you go back to the slide about you have these curves that were basically area curves of PFAS, PFHXS, and PFOS. So could you re-clarify just two things for me because my brain was kind of stuck on this. So the red, can you delineate the difference again between the red and the green lines?
That is a great point that I should be able to do that. I can't for you right now. I'd be happy to answer that via email that can be shared throughout. Yes,
That's okay. Yeah, we'll save it for another time. That's
Yeah,
okay.
no,
For just just as a secondary follow-up then. So essentially what you're saying is that in conditions like in this kind of capillary zone, this air-water interface zone, you're essentially saying that there is a longer residence time for PFAS in conditions where there is this kind of zone. There's like a greater time in which it stays inside of this compartment or in this like within the plume. It has a lower and slower transport rate than one that's maybe like totally submerged in water.
yes. And we will almost always get this type of zone. It depends on how large this air-water interface is in this capillary fringe zone. But yes, we anticipate due to the chemical properties of PFAS, we will have longer residence time based on the air-water interface absorption. Also, this varies based on the length of chain. So longer chain PFAS have a stronger affinity to stick around in these areas because of their
Right.
strong and longer tails.
Right, the hydrophobic interactions that they're having.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anybody else raising their hand in the room? I'm so sorry I can't be there. Is there somebody else that wants to ask a question, or am I allowed to ask another one?
Chris, you may ask another question. Kristen wanted me to let you know that she is waiting for you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Dr. Hare. My next question is how chemically does oxidation impact PFAS or PFAS transformation? Because what I understand is that these chains of fluorinated carbon are highly resistant to any type of chemical modification. And so I'm really curious about what your thoughts are on how oxygen tension, oxygen prevalence modifies PFAS compounds and what is or isn't known about that.
That is a fabulous question. And again, you are stretching the bounds of my chemical knowledge of the actual reactions themselves. What we do know is we see this transition from anoxic to oxic zones having a difference in the amount of precursor versus daughter compounds. So longer chain to shorter chain, whether that's intermediate or the ultimate terminal PFAAs or similar products. So I can't answer your question, but I again will follow up with you and share the knowledge with all interested parties with research that could point to the actual.
Dr. Hare?
Yes.
David Bout is on the line. He would like to speak now.
Yes. Thank you.
David, can you unmute?
While we're waiting for Dr. Bout, one quick last question I just have for clarification is that then maybe saying that it could actually not be anything to do with biotransformation and maybe more like preferential separation and distribution into these different compartments?
So by that you are referring to like different flow pathways.
Yeah, or just like oxygen content maybe being a mediator of like where PFAS preferentially accumulates in the system that you're studying with us.
Um, that could be. What we have seen is that these. So okay, so in the example. Sorry, I'm gonna point to a picture so it's more clear what I'm. All right, so in this example here, this is gonna refer to exactly what I'm talking about. So what we do see is.
Can you tell him what slide it is? Because he can't see your screen.
I
Oh,
can
can you
see it.
not?
No, I can see your screen.
Thank you though. So ultimately, what we often see in these discharge zones is a focusing of multiple pathways to a single discharge location. Not all the pathways. He can't see what I'm pointing at, but we do see a focused area. So we do see that there are different flow paths converging in one single location. So to your point, yes, you could, if we were just sampling this, the discharge location at the stream in this image, you would be measuring a bunch of different flow paths converging together, rather than having what you see in panel B here being the single source path where it makes more sense. So you would see this potential degradation. You would see these multiple paths aligned, therefore kind of maybe confusing where the actual flow paths are coming from. That said, this study in particular was able to use other sources of identifying pieces such as water isotopes to actually identify that the different flow paths and what they were actually contributing to these sources. But you're right, it is difficult to separate and compartmentalize different flow paths, but we can use other chemical tracers and heat tracers to kind of start to untangle this. I don't think I answered your question directly, so please.
That's okay. You took me to school, so no, I just have a lot more questions and there is time. So with that, I'll yield. Thank you so much, Dr. Hare.
And please ask any question, follow up with any questions. I'm happy to at least point you to people who do know more about the actual chemical transformation piece than I do, as well as direct you to resources.
Dr. Bout is available to talk now.
Okay.
Doctor? I see you unmuted. He did want to clarify that the geologic and hydrogeologic conditions in the Barnes aquifer system are actually pretty similar to those of the Cape Cod aquifer. So that was one note. David, do you have additional? He's muted again. If there are additional RAB questions, Kristen?
Thank you. Might be easier to hear me if I do that. So that, those curves that Chris was talking about, it looks like the green curves have a peak where the feds were gonna set their levels.
Okay.
And so what is scary to me is that even at the 4 parts per trillion for PFOS, you're still talking about almost 5,000 years.
So this is a modeling example, right? So we do have to take that into consideration. And so more what I wanted to get out of this is that there is this centuries-long legacy effect. I wouldn't, and that can be real, and that is only exacerbated by the fact that there is air-water interface. So what the take home for me here is that how important considering this zone is for thinking about how long-lived these chemicals are, and how important then is source zone remediation. Because without removing the source, there will be continued contamination entering for a long time because of this air water, for one of the reasons being this air water interface piece. So I hope, yes. But so this is, a modeling exercise that I think effectively shows the importance of that.
Right. Can I keep going? Okay. And so when this is just, I have never seen it plotted out with it for time in years. So I'm a little taken aback, and I apologize.
I can share what I was planning on doing was sharing the folder with all the literature that
I love that.
Yes, and so I'll zip that and share that. And so obviously I have a report too that writes up everything in a lot more detail. I mean, it doesn't necessarily go into, Smith super focus, but it would at least direct you to that information.
So that interface, right, that air water and the middle zone there, right?
Yep.
Theoretically, all of our wells would intake water below that layer,
Yes.
right? Even considering like a worst case scenario, right, our wells should be, below the water table, right?
Well, so they can be screened at the water table. So often shallow groundwater wells are screened over. So part of it, the intention would be to capture that zone. But often the wells can be totally below. So because it's like, so when a well is built, there is a portion of it that you actually intake the water from, and that's the screen portion.
Yep.
And that could be 5, 10, 15 feet or more. And so depending on how that screen is situated, what you are sampling from that well is an integration of whatever, or is an average of whatever is across that interface.
Yeah, I think you're talking about drinking water wells, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's talking about drinking water
Okay,
wells.
sorry,
Yeah, no
yes.
problem.
These are monitoring wells. Sorry, that's it.
So if our drinking water wells are theoretically, well below, right, the water table,
Mhm.
and the water table level is also called depth to groundwater, right? When people are surveying the land and stuff?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So if the PFAS sort of builds up around that moving
Mhm.
interstitial space.
Yep.
How does that affect temporarily the quality of the drinking water being sucked up by the well?
So that is right. So more what okay. It's a great question, and I understand where you're coming from. When I'm talking about the importance of air-water interface, I am largely talking about the importance of it at the source zone. So where is it coming from in the first place? And so as the AFFF and its and the daughter products are infiltrating through the unsaturated zone and moving vertically, they're going to get hung up and stick around in those areas. Then once it enters the saturated zone, it's going to move with the water largely. And so when you're actually taking it up from the drinking water, it'll really depend on the transport within the aquifer itself, and you will not be taking it from the air-water interface in that regard. It's more of just how it's getting into the water and ultimately to the drinking water well is the air-water interface consideration. Yeah, I see that I'm just confusing you, so I want to make sure that
It's still going. So if we were to experience drought conditions and that interface drops and drops and drops, right? There's like a something of influence, right, that each well has?
yeah, the zone of
And
influence.
does it draw also from above and below? Is that like a three-dimensional thing, or is?
It is a three-dimensional thing. And so what would be a bigger consideration is after a drought, the rebound. And so because then that's when you're going to,
It's more mobile.
then you start to mobilize everything that had been kind of spread out in that air-water interface. And so it's more, and so it's less of thinking about the dry and the wet zone, and it's more about this like fluctuating in between and spreading out this area that has essentially spreading out the top of that water interface, giving essentially pulses of contaminants to the aquifer, which then get transported down to the area, to your cone of influence, which is much more of a physical property.
Okay, and last one, sorry about last one.
Keep on going.
When the groundwater discharges to the surface water,
Mhm.
right, at that sandy, beachy interface on the edge of a stream, river, whatever.
Yeah.
Are those daughter products the same that you would get using a total oxidizable precursor test?
Yes, they would be a component of the total oxidizable. As you know, yeah, because the total oxidizable can give you a lot more than, but it would be a piece of that, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course, and if you have, and don't apologize at all, if you have any more questions, I'm happy to field whatever. Yes. Of course.
Dr. Bout does have additional to add, so he's ready.
Can you all hear me this time? Wait, yay. Hi, this is Dr. Bout, a colleague of Dr. Hare's. Yeah, I just wanted to just comment on the kind of the comparison between the geology and the hydrogeology of the Barnes Aquifer to the Cape Cod system. They're actually, even though they're pretty far apart, the origin of the deposits, the relationship between kind of the groundwater flow system and the surface water bodies like Hampton Ponds, for example, are actually not that dissimilar from what we see in the Cape Cod aquifer system. The scale of the aquifers are different, but they're both related to essentially the deposition of sediments that were coming from a essentially a delta deposit that was depositing into glacial Lake Hitchcock, glacier or related deposits. And so those I think the comparisons are actually, in terms of just the geology and hydrogeology, are quite strong. So that's all. I just wanted to make sure that was related to y'all. And I think there's been a lot of good work looking at PFAS transport, PFOA transport in these systems, and how when you have a plume that is just discharging to the surface water features, be it a stream or a lake, those processes are really important, and we've learned a lot from those studies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional RAB questions online or in the room? Or should we move on to the environmental restoration program status update?
This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Sinclair.
I was having trouble changing. Oh, there it goes.
Just to reclassify for everybody, I believe you have the presentation. I believe the report was sent out, but they have, she's responsible for putting out a final product, which is to incorporate all the questions that you guys asked today to make sure that's in a question and answer. It sounded like there might be a couple more questions. So if I could get I'm going to look at you, Kathleen, because you're the one person. If there are any questions, I don't know if you can get it to me tomorrow so I can get it to them, because they have a short period of time to get the final questions and answers back to you, if that's at all possible. And then that way it'll be distributed with all those questions and answers in a final product with that report that you guys should have.
That's great, sure.
We can powwow later. Yeah, wrap it all up. Yeah.
All right, thank you. We'll now move into the environmental restoration program status update by Robert Lewis with the National Guard Bureau.
Hello, it's Robert. Glad to be back here again. It's been about 6 months off, so it's nice to be in person again. I don't have a lot to say, so we'll go over just this slide right here. Site 2, we went through the whole lease addendum, and we went through doing the activity and use limitation, which we in other areas called land use controls, that we're not doing anything with this property. Mr. Thomas came by the other day, did an audit, looked at it. It is all up to par. So we're kind of going to put this site to bed as for, discussing it, because right now there's nothing going on. We have that in place, that we do a 5-year review. These things will be looked at again whenever the state comes back, or do you come back?
We'll let you know.
Yeah, there you go. I like that answer.
I need your consent.
Yeah. So,
Is it timely? Is it timely?
I was there in, I think it was,
January.
January, right. And, there is a permanent solution statement under state regulations for IRP site number 2, installation restoration program site number 2, which is the former POL site, which is the current fuel distribution location.
yes.
So the permanent solution report discusses all the sampling, all those nitty gritty little details. And a picture and a cross section and a bunch of tables with a bunch of numbers and decimal points. And that was all good to go. So then there's a deed restriction out there, the activity and use limitation. They can use it for petroleum storage until the cows come home, until kingdom come. Good to go. Current activities, good to go. If they build a building, they need to consider vapor intrusion because there's residual petroleum contamination that remains there, which meets state environmental regulations in its current condition.
So they can't build a building.
They need to evaluate the potential for vapor intrusion. Their current buildings, they have a little, a building where somebody stands and turns the pumps on or transfer pumps or something like that. That was evaluated and is satisfactory. And the person who works in that building does not have an occupational exposure.
Do we know if they're gonna build there?
The owner of the property needs to be mindful that they have a restriction on their deed. So if that owner decides, I want to do something, suppose the Air Force wants to put a go-kart track in the POL site. Well, that would be okay. For example, that would not be an activity that would cause any greater level of risk to anybody. So that's an okay activity. But if they do something that has the potential to cause, they need someone, a special state expert with a license who knows what we're going to be looking for. In the semi-privatized program, they're expected to do this first, and then we come check it. That's what's happened in IRP site number 2 for the petroleum. It's also a site that's under investigation for the PFAS, because there's 2 things going on at that one last sewer property. But the petroleum aspect is done. They have complied with state regulations.
Because in Westfield, sometimes they just go and do it, and then they say they're sorry later. So I want to make sure
Well,
that.
that's why we had an inspection and we communicated with Jennifer on the property, like, hey, there's paperwork here, okay? And we had that conversation just like you and I are having right now.
A very cold day.
Yeah, Jennifer and I did that, standing on that property, just like this, to have a memory in the mind of the property owner. We try to give them a memory. Hey, you agreed, for example, just to use you as an example, you agreed that you can leave so much of that schmutz behind, and we'll say it's okay, provided you agree you're not gonna build a house there, for example.
Is it documented then? Is it documented?
Oh, absolutely.
You said it was verbal.
Oh, no, absolutely not. It's well documented.
Okay.
This is Sarah Sinclair, base civil engineer. If I were to have to put a building there for any reason whatsoever, Jim Baker is not going to let me do any type of construction until I have cleared it environmentally. So anything that I do, she is checking, as well as Robert Lewis. They're making sure that I stay within all of the environmental rules and regulations.
But if you leave, where is that information?
It doesn't matter.
She's a civilian permanent party. This is a military airman who might go someplace else tomorrow, okay? But the civilian permanent party, I'm using my own voice again because this is a large one, please. Okay. And that's why I didn't bother Lieutenant Colonel Sarah. I talked with Jennifer.
But if she seeks her position,
It's
there's
on
a lot of.
there's all the paperwork.
And we have a base map, that should be like a base plan map that should have these locations noted, but it is filed with the state and they have all that information. The purpose solution statement, it's on the list.
Just to make sure that statutory required to fulfill that position. So if Jen decided she no longer wanted to work anymore, it would be incumbent upon me as the installation commander to fill that as quickly as possible, if not immediately. So
And with all of her expertise that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you be able to share that agreement? Is that
Yeah, what's the lease tracking number? The short answer is yes, it's in the public file. It's available to anybody with an internet connection to read it for free. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I don't know the lease tracking off the top of my head, because I deal with so many leases, so. The short answer is yes. My contact information is here, and tomorrow morning, shoot me an email or give me a call and say, what's the RTN for IRP Site 2, and I'll know what it is. And if you send an email, I can send you the link that you can click and go to the state website that will have the list of files and you can read till your heart's content. You can arrange it in reverse chronological, you can arrange it in chronological order or reverse chronological order. And the latest document you'll find in the file is our letter to them saying, thank you, everything's fine. It's going back.
Thank you.
Perfect. Just to kind of keep it short, because we're starting to run long and we have some more to do. As for the PFAS RI, we've involved that, and thankfully today we can tell you that we are out in the field. They're drilling holes. That started on the 13th. Drew's going to tell you more about that. We're doing sampling, monitoring well installation is going to follow. And I just reiterating the fact that we did, we are still working out a few ROEs. I will say that. So we're still trying to get a few access agreements with the city, maybe one or two private entities, but we're bringing all this, kind of wrapping it all up, and should have a good solid field event over the next few weeks. And I sent you the soil sample data. I didn't know if you had any questions. You got your Excel file
And I have water data too.
later. We don't have anything right now.
Okay, no, I thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So that's all I have to say. So I'm going to turn it over to Drew Patel and let them tell you about all the field work that is taking place. Oh no, we did have, I got one more slide. All right, this is just a reminder of where we're at. They have added a nice, lovely red line. So you can just clearly pick out we're in Q2 of 2026 and Q3 of the fiscal year FY26. We're fully involved in the field work, and you can see the TAP grant ends Q3 of 2026. So that's one of the reasons they got to get it wrapped up, because Sarah's got to make sure it's all closed out in a timely manner ahead of that final date. So if there are other questions, the faster the better. All right, Drew.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Barton here. I'm the project manager for the Army Corps of Engineers, PFAS RI. So this slide right here talks about our PFAS RI project field work scope. We shared this with you all, I believe, the last two RAB meetings. So you've probably seen this before. Because we're green highlight. That means that task is in progress. Yellow highlight, that means that's going to go ahead. So the first 4 items here are probably similar to what we had last time. There's been ongoing for a while, access agreements, utility location. We did complete our round 1 surface soil sampling. And the next 3 items is a vertical aquifer sampling. That's kind of where we are right now. And I probably could have also highlighted the groundwater monitoring well installation green, because we're starting that next Monday. So the vertical aquifer sampling started April 13th, and groundwater monitoring well installation starts April 27th, so next Monday. And I'll talk more about schedule on our last slide here, but those are really the 2 ongoing pieces, physically ongoing in the field right now. And the yellow items here is kind of where we're going next. And as I mentioned just a second ago, we'll talk about those a little bit more when we get to the schedule. When we start working on those. Okay, next slide, please. So again, my intent today is going to talk about the vertical aquifer sampling and monitoring well installation. We had that slide after this one? Yeah. Oh, we did. Okay. All right. Sorry, I thought it was before this one, but
I can go to it.
okay. So this is a highlight from today. This is where the field crew is today on our first vertical aquifer sampling location. So to give you a little orientation here, you come off the turnpike, take it right at the light on 202, head down the hill, Holyoke Road's on your left. There's a little V with a small little park right there. That's where these guys are right now. So we're looking southwest, I think, at this location, right here. So they finished up that well today. So that's vertical aquifer sampling and just on direct push rig. So I just want to let you know that we're out there today, checking on the stats. Okay, so vertical aquifer sampling. What is it? It's kind of like a screening tool to spatially and vertically delineate PFAS in groundwater at the site. So we're focusing our vast locations on the area south of where we own the right now. So you can see these are all pretty much south of the turnpike right here, where we're not really sure where groundwater contamination is or if there is anything there. So vertical aquifer sampling, as I mentioned, is a screening tool. Use a direct push rig to pretty much push down a 2-inch diameter pipe, and you can collect soil samples from that pipe. And you collect groundwater samples as well. It's a lot less expensive and a lot less intrusive than a monitoring well installation. So a monitoring well is going to cost several tens of thousands of dollars. This is much, much less expensive. You can get an idea of where the ground contamination is, and then you can install groundwater wells in here. So we're putting in 10 of these locations, and at each location, we'll collect up to 4 groundwater sample depths at the location. So as I briefly mentioned, it involves using a direct push drilling rig. So it's essentially that 2-inch diameter tube. What we do is we push it down to refusal, or we put it down in water. And we characterize the lithology or the geology. Is it sand, is it clay, all the way down. Then we'll collect the groundwater sample all the way at the bottom. And then we'll also collect a groundwater sample where we identify the groundwater table. And then we'll collect up to 2 different groundwater samples in between that interval. So if one's at 10, groundwater table's at 10, go down to 100, we might collect samples in the middle at 40 and 60. If a groundwater elevation is at 90 and depth is 100, we may only collect those 2 ones. So it really depends where the groundwater table is and how deep we can get. So again, we characterize that lithology. I'm sorry, go back to
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. We'll characterize the lithology, we determine the groundwater level, we identify those groundwater sample collection depths, and then we collect those groundwater samples. And we'll use that to evaluate where do we want to put additional monitoring wells in the future, both in the unconsolidated aquifer and in the bedrock aquifer to adequately characterize the vertical insulation extent in fossil ground. Okay, so that's one phase that we started with the 13th. We've got about 5 locations done, so we're about halfway there. The next step we're starting next Monday is actual physical groundwater monitoring well installation. And again, the objective here is similar to the vast sampling. So we want to spatially and vertically delineate the nature extent of PFAS and groundwater. Where we're installing these wells, you can see it's a lot further to the north, around the perimeter of the base. They installed several wells on base during the expanded site inspection, and that showed kind of where PFAS was. So we're trying to step out a little bit, so we can potentially delineate the extent to the east and west of PFAS contamination, get a better idea of where the plume is migrating off-site to the south, and we're also putting a couple into the north, so we can see if there's any PFAS migrating on-site. So we have 22 monitoring wells at 11 different locations. So at several locations, we have several different well greens proposed, so we can get a vertical delineation. So at each location is either between 1 and 3 monitoring wells being installed, so we can get a better handle on the vertical distribution of PFAS. So the process includes monitoring well installation, which is a lot more involved than the vertical aquifer sampling. We have a fairly large sonic drilling rig. It puts down a 6-inch diameter core. We evaluate the lithology from that core, and then we install our groundwater well screens and install permanent wells. And once those wells are installed, we have to develop the wells. So we get all the fines out of there and make sure we're getting a good quality sample out of the aquifer. And once that's done, we collect groundwater samples. And we use that groundwater sampling data in conjunction with the vast data and the data from the existing wells to see what our next steps are. Where do we install our bedrock wells? Where do we install more permanent groundwater monitoring wells if needed? So the information from these next 2 will kind of feed into our phase 2 of monitoring installation. And we hope to have this done by the end of, probably the end of May. And I'll jump into that on the next slide, which is our schedule. So as Robert noted, we're still working on some access agreements here. And utilities, every time we break ground for a soil sample or a monitoring well, we have to use utilities. That's going to be an ongoing thing as well. Our surface soil sampling is complete, round 1. We're going to have to do another round of that in October. I'll get to that in the next slide. Vertical aquifer sampling going on right now. First round of monitoring wells going on right now as well. And we hope to have those finished, as I mentioned, and sampled by the end of May. So we'll have groundwater, at least data to the lab by the end of May for the vertical aquifer sampling. And the new monitoring wells, we need to get that turned around, analyzed, and validated, and discussed internally. And then at that point, we'll have data to share.
Good.
So our next really work effort in the field after we get these wells installed is our surface water and sediment sampling and our habitat assessment. We hope to do that in the May-June timeframe. Once we get that data back from the monitoring well sampling and the vast sampling, we have our second round of monitoring well installation I think June and July is a bit optimistic, but we can hope there, depending on how quick the lab and the validators can turn around the data. And then the next slide. So after that, we hope to do our background surface soil sampling and our round 2 of surface soil sampling in October. We use those data to determine where we need to collect subsurface soil samples. And then once all of our round 2 groundwater monitoring wells are installed, we have a comprehensive site-wide groundwater monitoring event scheduled for November. So that's collecting groundwater samples from every single well that we install. And we'll do that twice, so we can get a seasonal effect. We'll do that in November, and then we'll do that again in May. And then also in November, we'll collect our second round of surface water and settlement samples, so that we'll have a temporal evaluation in the spring and the fall for those things as well. And then, depending on our first round of subsurface soil sampling, we may need a second round of that will probably be better. So that's it for the schedule, and I think that's all I have.
With that, are there RAB member questions in the room on that update?
Where do you send these samples to? Who analyzes?
We send the PFAS samples to Patel has a laboratory in Norwell, Mass. It's specifically dedicated to PFAS sampling. There's our backup lab on the zero bins. Right now, we're going to send them to our lab in Norwell. We also collect TOC samples, which is total organic carbon, pH, anion exchange capacity, and we send those to Eurofins. I have to check my plan, make sure that's correct, and I'm pretty sure it's Eurofins.
And where's that?
That is in Lancaster, PA. It's killing me. I think it's never pays. I have to get back to the other. I can't remember the lab of this.
Because that's big transport. It's too bad you don't have a lab closer to look at that.
Yeah, I mean, getting accreditation for these is pretty tough, and the labs that do barbecue are all really backed up. So there aren't many, at least that I'm aware of. Maybe I don't know if you know.
No,
many
that's true. I know we're sending yours to Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, again. Kristen, I'm wondering, when do you expect to see data for surface water? It said May, June, but is that the sampling, not the results?
The active field event, correct?
And are Pond Brook and Armbrook being sampled?
Yes.
And, okay, so I have a follow-up question, but it's more about the next tab. So if others want to ask other questions, can we come back to that?
Chris Clark online, you have a question?
Yes, question and a comment. First of all, thank you so much for this work. It's amazing, and it really warms my heart to see how collaborative this space is between the community, the private contractors, and the base. I'm really, really grateful for that. And I've looked at the water sampling data, and I'm wondering if it's not a matter of security, would they also be willing to provide us the spatial coordinates, GPS location, longitude, latitude, anything to also relate the chemical data that's being pulled from these to a physical location? Because right now I have like a name, like a character-based name for each of the sampling sites, but it would be great to understand how each of these samples relates to one another spatially, if that's possible.
Not all of it would be possible to share because it would be personally identifiable information from some of the private locations. So those cannot be shared.
Sure.
So maybe go ahead.
Yeah, the one even if the one's on the base. So yeah, of course, personally, private identity and information needs to be protected. That's totally fine. And maybe I missed my chance earlier to make this mention between the switch off between someone who spoke and then Battelle. Is it for those base site specific sample locations if those data are available as well?
Well, so if I'm not mistaken, like, when you look at our maps, they show where those sites are taken deep. And so you can just look at it on a map and they correspond to the sample ID. Is that right? I mean, yeah. So
yeah. If that data isn't available, that's okay. I only ask because I can do larger modeling. I have experience in environmental modeling and wanted to be able to relate them to one another and do different hierarchical clustering and some other analyses as well, just for my own uh, benefit of being able to understand the extent of the contamination and its behavior on the base. But totally okay and understandable if that's not available. Yeah, I understand it's on the map. I just wanted to save a couple extra steps.
Yeah, no worries. I can ask those questions.
Thank you so much, and I'll follow up too at the next RAB. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Hi, Mary Ann Babinski. This question is either fact or fiction, I don't know. This is from somebody in the public who asked me about it and to check on it. Whether it's related to anything that we've discussed today or not, I don't know, but it has to do with water from the base. They don't know if it was due to runway. They didn't even know when exactly this happened. Work on the runway, or it could have something to do with all the testing, monitoring wells that are being done at the base for this project. But that, I guess there was some flooding, that water that traveled from the airport down to the area in back of the fire department, where that HOCA building is there. They got a lot of flooding because of work that was being done from the airport. That's the information they heard. So they didn't know if it had anything to do or could be related to this PFAS contamination. So I don't know if anybody here knows anything about that, or it's just already ancient history.
I'm gonna say that, sorry, Sarah Sinclair, any of the work that's on the runway is technically not the base's property, and it is managed by the airport.
Okay.
So, you would have to ask them about it, especially if that's going to that portion and causing any type of flood, because we're not allowed to really touch that area, because it's owned by the city.
Right. Well, it's just water, and it's flooding, and it's moving.
Yeah.
So so whether it was caused by work at the air runway or not, could that have some kind of an impact on the situation that we're discussing here? That's what I'm concerned about.
Okay, that part I can't answer, but at least that other one is the airport.
Yeah, I guess if somebody from the airport did supposedly go.
I don't know, but runoff would be a question for.
Yeah, we probably need more information to be able to answer that question.
Well, somebody knew what was going on there, I guess, at the airport or wherever they worked there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's nothing related to the work that we're doing, like, we didn't do anything that would have caused that. And does it have any, but without having more information, I just.
Okay. All right. I'll just relay that answer.
Yeah.
As for residential property, I'm not aware of any excess runoff and onto any of the property with fire department, so.
Oh, yeah.
It would be the city of Westfield's fire department, not our.
Oh, okay, okay.
That's
fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
All right. Thank you.
If that concludes the RAB questions, we'll move on to public questions and comments. Dr. Bout did say that are the soil sediment cores from the rotosonic drilling being archived somewhere?
Physically, you mean, or, I mean, they'll be characterized on board logs electronically, but physically, no, we're not taking them and keeping them somewhere. Oh, sorry, you wanted to answer the question. No, yeah, that's fine.
He said physical.
Okay, yes, we're not keeping those. Those would be disposed of. That's the use of that place.
I don't believe we have any other public in the room. And if that's it, we will continue to be on time for this meeting and talk about contact information. I do, as I'm taking this over, I'm told to follow some rules. And one thing we do ask is if RAB member questions and comments that you'd like to get to this team, if they could go through your co-chair, Kathleen, that would be wonderful. We do ask you to do that. Otherwise, you have the contact information. Nothing on this has changed since the last meeting. I will say that I did some link checking today, so I have updated some of these. And if you're using the links that are live, please use the version that will be sent out in the final, in the next email, so that all these live links are live. I did notice a couple weren't as easy to follow now since changes get made periodically. Kathleen, would you like to provide some closing remarks?
You said you had a question for me?
I did, is that okay? A couple weeks ago, Kathleen asked me, about a TAP, right, and last time we submitted it in July for review, is that right, the application? And so the only thing we haven't done is the environmental assessment. Which if we had the surface water information, we could do for Pond Brook and Arm Brook. And so the question that I had was whether or not we could write the proposal without the data being on hand. That's like an administrative procedural thing that is more your alley than mine. But they're expecting to collect the samples and then have the data sometime near or after our next RAB meeting,
It's probably around that time.
right? Because I mean, summertime, there's a lot of water testing with PFAS, like you're gonna be in line.
So what are you wanting this TAP to do?
It would be, probably a toxicologist or an environmental person, another academic, so that we can learn and question, right? But to go over the effects in the ecosystem of Pond Brook, Arm Brook, and possibly those kettle ponds up at Hampton Ponds, right? Because there's a do not eat the fish up there. And we know that there's PFAS in the kettle ponds. But we don't have any information about the environmental effect, and people eat the fish out of Arm Brook. Right? They like literally supplement their family's diets with fish. Yeah, so that would be, and I don't mean like taking new data, their data, but interpreted not so much in terms of where the PFAS is moving, but what it means for us.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you can write a proposal before the technical documents exist.
Well, so I mean, you can write the proposal, right? You can just write the.
Well, I could draft it, but.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, like, you would submit it, but then, yeah, if we didn't have all the information. You gotta spend that money by, a certain amount of time into with your contracts and stuff. There's also like a limit to how much you can get from, how much money you can get for TAP grants. So I don't know if it's not wiser to maybe hold off a little while before you do your next TAP, to where you have more information collected, because we'll do whatever, but
Are they still gonna exist if we wait a year?
if you TAP grants,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, they might not.
I'm just nervous about, right, I mean, the funding for,
So,
right, when I originally was asked about the changes in the timeline,
yeah,
my fundamental assumption was that everybody had just made a bad assumption about how long this stuff would take, right?
yeah.
But I have since been informed that on another base, it was because their restoration money got cut by 30% last year. So I'm trying to learn more about that to see if I can share it with you. But if that's what happened in the Army, I can only ask whether or not we are going to end up seeing similar redirecting of funding toward what is considered more immediate stuff, right? And I'm not in charge of any of that, but I just want us to be able to gently understand if the landscape in front of us is changing.
Yeah, no, I can go back and ask that question too. So we do like prioritizations, and TAP grants rank fairly high on prioritization for funding. So I think if we wait a year, yeah, the money's still, but it's such a small amount of money.
Robert,
Yeah.
we have a Chris Brown from.
Chris is a good person. to
Yeah,
ask
he's
this
got
question.
it. He's waiting to talk. So Chris?
All right. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, Chris Brown. You might remember me from a while ago. I was just gonna say, yeah, with your TAP grant request, whatever ideas you have on it, just send it in to us and we can work with you to develop what you need for a scope or whatever the requirement would be and work on trying to advocate for the funding that would be needed in the future. I wouldn't worry so much about the calendars and when those timeframes are, because if you're in the middle of the year now, so we'd be probably working on trying to get you a project in next year's money. So because by the time we would get this all put together and work on getting a contract, so you would be working probably in next year's money. So feel free to put the stuff out that gives us time to, ask questions back and forth, verify what the product you really want is, and then we can work on making it go forward. I don't see any problem with trying to apply for another TAP grant. As Robert was saying, yes, there are caveats with the finances, but you and I know we know how to work those, and we can usually advocate for Barnes' interest most of the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
And I have your RTM if you want it.
Oh, well, there you go.
1000288.
288, that's it. 288, and Kathleen, I have your email address here, and I'm gonna email you that letter that we have shared.
And those
There you go.
there, it's in the administrative record, people, and the information on how to get that is in our RAB notes.
Thank you, Kristen.
I'll send it to you.
Great job, Kristen.
As we're a couple of minutes over, Kathleen, did you have some closing comments?
Just a quick comment, because of the government shutdown that happened last year, a lot of this stuff was pushed back. And so I was glad to see your report that sampling is going on and it is our data and not somebody else's. Thank you very much, everybody.
Colonel Blacks.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the next meeting in July as well. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you to everyone for participating. I apologize. As my first meeting, I was a little rough. We went a little over. But I do appreciate the thoughtful discussion and the time you've dedicated, and the meeting is adjourned. Have a good night.
And don't worry, they
Thank
used to
you.
chase us out at 8. You're okay, you're fine.
Whenever, like 2 minutes.